traditional.
Got it.
The flaming chalice is the symbol of our denomination. It's usually a flickering chalice, however.
As long as there's light.
All right. Well, our reading this morning is not from the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran or any other traditional place, but rather from Hippocrates, who helps us to understand that we're not the first to recognize the relationship between climate and health. He, in fact, wrote an entire thesis called on airs, waters, and places. And this is the introduction to that treatise. Whoever wishes to investigate medicine properly should proceed thus. In the first place, to consider the season of the year and what effects each of them produces, for they are not all alike, but differ much from themselves in regard to changes. Then the winds, the hot and cold, especially such as are common to all countries, and then such as are peculiar to each locality. We must also consider the quality of the waters, whether they be marshy and soft or hard, running from elevated and rocky situations, and then if saltish and unfit for cooking, and the ground, whether it be naked and deficient in water or wooded and well-watered, and whether it lies in a hollow, confined situation or is elevated and cold. So this morning, we're going to talk about how things have changed since namely with regard to our climate and its impact on our health. Dr. Sandy Koch and I are going to be speaking, and Dr. Koch is going to take the first round here. She's recently retired obstetrician and gynecologist. She graduated from Middlebury College and received her MD at Tufts University. She pursued her residency in OBGYN at the University of Colorado. She is a fellow of the, and a good fellow, by the way, and a fellow colleague of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. She's been very active in that college. She was chair of the Nevada section. She served on the college's president's task force on patient safety and on practice. And she's been the regional representative to the National Patient Safety Committee and served as its vice chair. She's also been legislative chair for the Nevada section. In Carson City, she was chair of the Carson Tahoe Hospital's Department of OBGYN and medical director of the Women's Health Institute. She's also been president of the Carson Douglas Medical Society. She serves with me with the Nevada Clinicians for Climate Action.
Yes.
Yeah. We struggled with that name, didn't we?
We did. I got it wrong for at least 6 months. We kept changing it.
And she's also taught at the Western Nevada College. So with that, Sandy, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, that sounds great. It's a pleasure to be here, and I can't see those faces out there, but I know you're all out there. And so let's begin. I just want you to know that Nevada Clinicians for Climate Action is a group of healthcare providers, no MD required. Anyone working in healthcare is welcome to join, and we're always looking for new members. And let's see, my slide did not move.
You may have just recruited someone.
Let me just check it out real quick here, make sure we're actually.
Oh, I probably wasn't put in the right space. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so
We'll come back.
there you go. Just do the up and down.
Okay, the up and down. Okay, perfect. So down. Okay, and I put this slide in here because I think we all know that climate change is making the news more than it ever has before. And this screen kind of helps us to see why that is. And if you look, this is a record from 1980 to 2023, and it shows the incidence of over $1 billion harm being done in the United States. And it shows by different colors what kind of harm is being done. So the green, which is the prominent color here, are all storm-related events, and they are increasing rapidly. And I think that's getting the attention of a lot of people and kind of shifting people over from a space of, is climate change actually man-caused? Is it actually real? To how are we going to solve this problem? Most of the storms have been in the center of the country, as you can see, but down in the left-hand corner, we have just a small circle that highlights the firestorm that hit Hawaii. In Maui, just destroying the whole town of Lahaina and leaving behind a trail of sadness and tragedy. This slide kind of just gives us an overview as an introduction to what we're talking about: rising temperatures, more extreme weather, and rising sea levels are having an impact all around the world. We're seeing, you know, extreme heat events, which Dr. Murphy's going to be talking about. The severe weather is causing injuries, fatalities, and a lot of mental health impact. The air pollution is increasing asthma, heart disease, among other things. And I think probably one of the biggest changes that I personally noticed was in the changes in vector ecology. When I first moved here, we've always owned the Labrador retrievers. And when I first moved here, we didn't have to use heartworm medication because heartworm's carried by mosquitoes. And now mosquitoes are able to winter over because Reno doesn't freeze in the winter in all places. We have a lot of hard surfaces that maintain heat. It's the same with the West Nile virus for horses. It's definitely concerning, and I think we're seeing an increase in allergies because we're seeing ragweed move into our area where we never had it before. Let's see. Oh, I'm going down. Okay, counting down the slides here. So wildfire damage is increasing across the western part of the country, and California has been hit worse than any place else. You can see the percentage of the burned areas that involve the interface between urban and wildlife areas. And, you know, this is partly just because of the climate change is causing drought. We're losing our snow earlier, so the fire season is longer. And also just from previous patterns of fire suppression, invasive species moving in. Nevada is losing its sagebrush basins from all sorts of different there. What's important is that this is the reason why we need to be doing prescribed burns.
Quick, just to make it easier for folks in the room to see what we're doing.
Okay, good, yeah, because I got the top up to that up too, and I don't know how to. Will that go away?
Let me see if I can. Not sure why it's hanging up there like that. If I hit a
Shrink the screen a little bit so we can see the whole screen.
Let me try it this way. Just a second.
Thank you.
Yeah. No. So, why that's. Not sure why it's.
We don't have to worry too much about that because.
Where'd you see it?
I video panel, but that's the picture you already.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. Okay, now we're getting there. Okay,
Great.
Nice. Good job.
all right, so
Good job, team. It takes a
there
village.
you go.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. So that's the reason for prescribed burns, and we had a prescribed burn that got out of control, 2 years ago and caused a lot of damage, and there's always this sort of back and forth between what we should be doing and what we actually doing, and risks of, actually, that wasn't a prescribed burn, it was a natural burn, but it appeared to be contained down in the Markleeville area, and caused a tremendous amount of damage. You just can't control the resources, but we do need to figure out how to reduce our incidence of fire. How many people, I got a lot of people on Zoom, so I can't see you all, but how many of you guys were traumatized by the smoke we had in the area?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone in the room was. It was pretty traumatic. Eight of California's 10 largest fires on record in the last have been then 12 in the top 20 have been in the last 5 years, and we've all been impacted on it. The winds tend to put the smoke right in our backyards. So the major risks, obviously burns, inhalation injury can make asthma and COPD worse. How many people know what airnow.gov is? Has anybody heard of it? Did you know about it 5 years ago? Yeah, I think we all, we're all suffering from it. I personally feel a lot of grief from having to live through that. I feel grief because we don't have air conditioning in our house, and we had no other way to cool the house off but to open up. It's worked for the last 30 years, but it's not working now when we have the heat in the summer. So I think probably I'm echoing things that other people here have experienced. The big issue from the wildfire smoke is the negative air quality that we get there, the small particulates that are really significantly, maybe up to 10 times more during fire, get into people's lungs, and they're really tiny, so they can get all the way out to the periphery of the lung to where the alveoli are, and they really can lead to a lot of long-term injury and consequences. And we have ozone, carbon monoxide, and benzene, which is benzene-like compounds, which are precursors for cancer. So clearly this is not good for our health. Climate change is a threat multiplier. And I think that also was evident during the fire, because when people have education, when they have access to good health care, when they live in a neighborhood that, is safe, and they have a community of people around who can support them, they have economic stability, they can survive these hardships. But for people who aren't in that position, it really exposes their vulnerabilities, and they suffer a lot more, their physical health and their mental health. Obviously, they were talking about infants, children, elderly, low-income people, but isolated people, unhoused people, and medicated people are also at great risk. When these kind of disasters happen, can you get access to your medication? If you're dehydrated, do your medications levels change? All of these kinds of things really matter when there's a climate emergency. So, climate also is talking about, there's really, I think all of us have sort of suffered mental health injury just from being in the smoke. And as these disasters increase in frequency, more and more of us are actually impacted by it. I think, there's a lot that just chronic low-level concern about what's going to happen in the future. And this is the hardest on people who are not in a position to address it. They don't have the resources to figure out how to survive. I mean, many of us have escape routes. We can drive to some friend or some family that's in another state, or we have people who will come and bail us out and put us up. So measured impact on mental health includes an increase in gender-based violence, and PTSD. The people who survived the campfire had rates of PTSD that were on par with war veterans, and that is saying that it was a war for them. It's what they went through, similar to what people have gone through who survived hurricanes and floods. Suicide risk was increased in farmers who have lost crops due to the climate change causing drought in their areas. And in addition, 2018 study showed as many as 40,000 more suicides will happen in Mexico and the United States if we can't kind of turn this around. Aggressive behavior, I think hot under the collar, most of us know that expression, and there's a reason for it, because high temperatures make people aggressive. So you can see this graph of the fact that climate worry is moving across, and nearly half of young adults, 18 to 34, feel stress in their daily lives related to climate change. A community of color already, living in higher percentage living in the redlined areas, and already exposed to more oil and gas pollution, already exposed to more air pollution, and with less resources, already on the edge of mental health, being mentally healthy. It just affects them more. So here we go, trauma, forced displacement. We read about this more than experiencing here in Nevada. It was affecting our neighbors, but still, it compounds the childhood experiences that people have had when they've had trauma as children. They have a much higher risk of severe mental illness. If you, on the survey of children, there were only about 9% who are not worried about climate change. So that means 91% of our children are fearful about climate change. And I just put this slide in here because it's my grandchildren that keep me working hard as I can in every way that I can think of to help build the political will that's needed to address climate change. And I just want to say, when I was in college in Middlebury, Vermont, acid rain was a really big deal. I had my first political act going to Congress to testify that they needed to do something about it. And you know what? They did. They actually did something about it. We fixed acid rain. There were specific identified chemicals that were causing it. The research was done. Scientists stepped in, gave us the knowledge that we needed, and we did it. And then we developed a hole in the ozone. And it was scary. It was changing ocean currents. It was increasing us to radiation exposure. And it was really, we knew it was caused by chemicals that we were putting in the atmosphere. That hole in the ozone is the smallest it's ever been recorded as since we started monitoring it in 1980. We can do this. We know what the cause is. We just need to build the political will. And with that, I'll turn this over to Dr. Murphy.
And Philip is now switching slide sets for us. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah.
There we go. Oops. All right. So, Sandra has talked to us about climate disasters and their impacts, wildfire risk, vulnerable populations, mental health impacts. I'm going to talk about heat-related illness and the more subtle effects on all-cause mortality that rising ambient temperatures cause. Of course, I'm going to talk about infectious diseases since that's my specialty. Rachel thinks I've included too many, so we'll see. I've tried to eliminate some of my favorites. And then finally, I want to talk about our means of adaptation to global warming, feeble as they sometimes seem. I just wanted to point out that the attitude toward climate and health that Sandy and I represent this morning is reflective of the AMA's position on climate change and health.
The American Medical Association.
Yes, exactly. They fully endorse the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and concurs with their scientific consensus that the Earth is undergoing adverse climate change and that human-caused contributions are significant, that these climate changes create conditions that affect public health, with a disproportionate impact on vulnerable populations, including children, the elderly, and the poor. This is our transition into heat-related illness. In other words, what we directly measure as disease and fatality related to heat, which is the tip of the iceberg. It's what we see. What we don't see is the impact on all-cause mortality below the surface. Oops, oh, wrong arrow, sorry. So let me just tell you what we mean by heat-related illness. There is heat stress that we all feel when we're working outdoors in the summer, we're sweating. And in fact, we can lose up to 2 liters of fluid per hour under those conditions. That, of course, begins to limit our ability to cool ourselves by sweating. But we are able to get rid of about a kilocalorie of heat per milliliter of sweat that we get rid of. But at a certain point, we run out of that option. We also run out of that option if the humidity is greater than 70%. It doesn't work anymore. We can no longer expire enough heat through sweat because the atmosphere's already got enough water in it without ours. And so we see an exaggerated impact on rates of heat-related illness in the American Southeast, for example, for that exact reason. So heat exhaustion is survivable, but the signs are anxiety, headache, confusion, flushing, and the skin becomes hot and dry, paradoxically. More severe, with a much higher mortality rate, depending on the region and access to cooling methods and healthcare, is heat stroke. And that occurs above usually an ambient temperature of 104. And that's characterized by incoordination, irritability, coma, seizures, muscle breakdown, kidney failure, pulmonary edema. So what are the risk factors for heat-related mortality? So we can speak in terms of exertional heat stroke, which is what affects healthy people who are working outdoors or exercising outdoors. So we're talking about athletes, military recruits, people with outdoor occupations, firefighters, construction workers, agricultural workers, and in Nevada, especially miners. But surprisingly, some indoor occupations, particularly kitchen work, in our casinos and restaurants and so on, is any folks working close to heat generating machinery or equipment. But on the other side are the non-exertional risk factors for heat-related illness. And this is children and the elderly, and of course people with certain comorbidities, as physicians call these underlying illnesses, diabetes, hypertension, the mentally ill, but also people of low income, communities of color, and there are some 542 proteins in our inflammatory system. And those feed directly into heat-related illness, and genetic mutations in many of those proteins can lead to a silent predisposition to heat-related illness. Certain medications, and I'll show you a few of those, and of course pregnancy. So here are the medications that predispose to heat-related illness, and alcohol, of course, is at the top, not just because it starts with A. And But also amphetamines and cocaine. So drug abuse is an issue. Some of these other drug categories you might not be familiar with, but some of you are on them, and particularly antihypertensive drugs and diuretics, but also thyroid medication and antidepressants. Well, not all of the mortality due to rising ambient temperature in the summer is heat stroke and heat exhaustion. Some of it is simply an increase in the risk of death for people with underlying predisposing illness or age and so on. And you can see that it starts at, surprisingly, at a temperature of 60, and below 60 is increased risk of mortality due to cold in the winter. And you'll notice, though, that the rise with increasing temperature in the summer months is a little steeper. And so heat-related mortality is a bigger problem than cold-related mortality. So what is the precise relationship between ambient temperature above the average maximum temperature to heat-related illness? In Quebec, we're taking a northern climb deliberately here, and this Canadian study demonstrated that heat-related illness increased 1.4-fold per 1 degree centigrade rise. That's 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit above the average maximum temperature. In North Carolina, it increased 37% per 1 degree centigrade rise. In Florida, it ranged from 1.2 to 1.4-fold increase per 1 degree centigrade rise. So it doesn't take very much above the usual maximum temperature to increase underlying mortality from all causes: heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes, and of course those medications that I told you about. So the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services is currently looking at regulations for outdoor workers, the Nevada equivalent of OSHA, in other words. And there's a lot of disagreement about what those regulations would be. What cutoff should it be? The proposed cutoff was 90 degrees. The contractors came in and said, no, it should be 105 degrees. Okay. So simply having a temperature cutoff is a little bit difficult. So for example, peak temperatures are in July, around July 13th or 14th in Nevada. And in Reno, that's 92 degrees. In Las Vegas, it's 104. So if you have a Renoite who's working on a highway in Clark County, that person's acclimatized to a lower temperature than someone who grew up in Clark County, right? So that's a problem. How do you account for that? But there are tables that supervisors can consult, which give expected average maximum temperatures for a given day of a given month, or just for a given month, that can be consulted in order to determine when these regulations should kick in. There's also a need to consider acclimatization. That is, if one is gradually introduced to the higher temperature, not working a full shift the first day that it's 105, that reduces the risk substantially. Obviously, the workers comorbidities, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and so on, should be considered, and what medications they're on. What are the interventions that help? Frequent breaks. Obviously, need to be more frequent at higher temperatures. A need for aggressive hydration. Everyone working outdoors in July needs to have a water bottle on their belt. And they need to have access to air conditioning, shade, and ice in case heat exhaustion does intervene, all right? So those are some of the things that the Nevada clinicians for climate action are going to be saying at the next hearing on this subject in March, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, I can't read my title here, so I'll do the best I can. So these are simply some of the diseases that predispose to increased mortality. And you can see that, for example, for diabetes, there's a 5% increase in mortality per 1 degree centigrade increase in the usual temperature in the summer months. But it's highest, interestingly, for the risk of myocardial infarction, as you can see there. This sort of compares the percentiles for average maximum temperature to the percentile of mortality for a given region, and that's all-cause mortality. And so obviously those big red circles are where the impact is greatest, and it's not necessarily where you would think it would be. It's concentrated in the Northeast and upper Midwest, in California, and the Pacific Northwest. Well, I'm going to switch now to talk about infectious diseases. Now, in 1986, when Anthony Fauci gave his first testimony before Congress, the first of annual testimonies before Congress over the years in between, he highlighted one emerging infectious disease, and that was HIV. And you can see the number of emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases has utterly exploded since then. This is the slide at his last testimony before Congress as he presented it. And I won't go through all of those. Rachel dissuaded me from doing so. So I'm going to take a few examples to kind of give you a sense of this. But these are the categories of infectious diseases that are impacted by rising global mean temperature. Vector-borne infectious diseases, that is, those transmitted by arthropods, mosquitoes, ticks. I left off mites, sandflies, black flies, deer flies, and so on. Rodent-borne diseases, waterborne diseases, foodborne illnesses, believe it or not. Even human-to-human transmitted diseases, such as summertime diarrheal illnesses due to viruses like enterovirus and adenovirus. And the soil-transmitted infections like hookworm and so on. Now, I want to show you a favorite experiment conducted by Dr. Nelson Davis. He followed a career path not unlike mine. He went to the University of California, where I used to spend summers in the Department of Parasitology. He got his MD at the fledgling medical school in San Francisco, now known as UCSF, and he trained in public health at Johns Hopkins. But he also joined the Rockefeller Foundation, one of whose major priorities in the 1920s and 30s was yellow fever. He set up a laboratory in Bahia, Brazil. And this was one of the experiments that he did in rhesus monkeys. Now, an intrinsic incubation period is the delay between the bite of the mosquito and the introduction of the virus into a human or monkey and the appearance of the illness. That's the intrinsic incubation period. The extrinsic incubation period is the time from the time the mosquito bites and acquires the virus and the time that that mosquito is infectious to a monkey or person. So he wanted to know whether temperature had any effect on how long that extrinsic incubation period was. And as you can see from this, the lower the temperature, the longer the extrinsic incubation period, so that it gets down to about 4 days at 98.6 or 37 degrees centigrade. So the higher the ambient temperature, the shorter the extrinsic incubation period, which means more extrinsic incubation periods per season. Not only that, it makes the season longer. So even more cycles of infection. It also shortens the gonotrophic cycle of the mosquito, so more generations of mosquitoes per season. It also shortens the generation time of the fly. It increases rainfall, which also provides more a breeding ground for mosquitoes. And as Sandy pointed out, it also increases the ability of the mosquito to overwinter. So they're more ready to go in the spring. And there are numerous other flies that transmit disease that have a similar pattern. Sandflies, deer flies, black flies, which cause onchocerciasis, and tsetse flies, which cause sleeping sickness and so on. So just taking yellow fever as the one vector-borne example, or mosquito-borne example, there have, after about 1942, there was no urban transmission of yellow fever in South America, just due to public health mosquito control efforts. But then, to a large extent, that was true in Africa as well. And then in Cameroon in 1990, there was a major outbreak, especially affecting children. It spread to West Africa in 1995, and there was a huge epidemic in 2016 in Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda, with almost 1,000 cases, 400 deaths. We actually ran out of yellow fever vaccine in order to deal with that episode, and there were some 30 million people vaccinated, so you can see why we might run out. And in fact, it led to a very rapid experiment in which it was shown that 1/5 of a dose was effective in providing immunity. So all of a sudden we had 5 times more vaccine. So that was instructive. And then in 2017, an epidemic in Brazil with 154 deaths. And that is ongoing. Both in South America, where you can see it has spread to Peru and Ecuador, and although the Angolan epidemic was contained, the spread to Central Africa and West Africa has been ongoing through 2023. Well, these are not vector-borne diseases. These are diseases that are transmitted from rodents and their relatives. These are the hantaviruses, and some of you might remember the Four Corners outbreak in 1993, particularly among Navajos, and that was the hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. This is a hantavirus found in North America and South America. And it is spreading. So it was pretty much confined to the American Southwest in the 1990s, but now it has moved north, and we've had cases here in Washoe County, in the North Valleys, in Arrow Creek, and this is a pulmonary syndrome associated with about a 50% mortality rate. The local virus is Sin Nombre virus. The South American virus is Andes virus. And the rodent that urinates in your garage provides the virus to you free of charge is the Paramiscus maniculatus. So when you clean your garage, wear an N95 mask. It's the dust contaminated with rodent urine that transmits this disease in all cases. Now, Nephropathia epidemica, the Europeans named this one, and they're fond of Latin terms. So there you are. It's caused by pumalavirus, and it is found across Scandinavia and into Eurasia. And the bank vole is the cause. Now, about every 4 years, traditionally, beech trees would have a bumper crop of seeds and in the fall, and then the following spring, there would be a bumper crop of bank voles, right? Because that's their food source. So with warming over the past 20 years, the frequency of those so-called masts, as these bumper crops are called, has gone down to every 2 years. So now, instead of having a peak in nephropathia every 4 years, not only in Scandinavia, but now in Western Europe and Central Europe, we're seeing peaks every 2 years. Malaria too is expanding its range. Increasingly northern latitudes, but also increasing altitudes. So higher on the mountain where it's endemic, and farther out toward the north. And so that's obviously a problem in both Africa and Asia, except that we have the mosquitoes right here in the southern United States, fully capable extending their range northward. So we're going to begin to see malaria once again, as it used to be, endemic in the southern United States. So the downward pressures for malaria incidence is the use of bed nets, mosquito control measures, treatment campaigns, and the major impact in terms of mortality of malaria is in children below the age of 5. So in many areas of Africa, for example, chemoprophylaxis of children in that age group is one of the major defenses against the mortality of malaria. So just as you take chemoprophylaxis to travel to an endemic area for malaria, those who live there need to chemoprophylax their children. Adults are immune enough that when they get malaria, they're less likely to die. The upward pressures, though, are the global temperature rise, as I've said, but also war, Obviously, it's hard to exert the downward pressures in a war zone. And of course, the malaria parasite is capable of resistance mutations that make it more infectious as well. And then there's El Nino. And so in El Nino years, there is a tremendous increase in the incidence of malaria, particularly in East Africa. But that's going to become true in other areas of the world as well, potentially even in the southern United States. Now, there are a number of tick-borne illnesses in Eurasia, particularly tick-borne encephalitis, but also a variant of Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and those ticks are expanding their range. In North America, of course, the tick-borne illness that is most a problem is Lyme disease. And this shows you the northward progression of the tick range that carries Lyme disease. So now it has already reached Canada. It was at one time confined essentially to New England, right? But it has spread westward into the American Midwest and northward into Canada. And you can see that by 2080, it's going to be at Hudson's Bay. Now, in the West, Lyme disease is transmitted along the Coast Range of California by a different tick called Ixodes pacificus. And it's due to expand its range as well. And we're already beginning to see autochthonous cases, in other words, cases that arose here in Washoe County. Whereas when I first came to Washoe County, it was strictly a California disease and a New England disease, and that's no longer true. Now, just briefly, to talk about seawater-related illnesses, cholera. Now, you see pictured there a copepod. They have an integral ecologic relationship with the cholera bacillus. Up to 1,000 cholera organisms can attach to each copepod. So with billions of copepods, of course, you have billions more of the cholera bacterium. And so with El Nino, the cold water of the depths of the ocean rises to the surface and becomes closer to human habitats along the coast, leading to tremendous epidemics along the Pacific coast, particularly of South America. And overall, this is the progression in rates of seafood-related illness in the United States. And you can see with progressive years, higher and higher peaks of seafood-related illness. So we'll just take one of those, namely Vibrio parahemolyticus, which causes a gastroenteritis, sometimes a full-blown sepsis with a certain mortality rate. And when I began my training in infectious diseases, this was a disease confined to the Gulf Coast. But now you can see it has already reached Alaska and the southern tip of Chile and Argentina. Well, we've mentioned El Nino, which causes warming both in the Pacific, both to the east and the west. So it's been responsible for explosions of malaria transmission in East Africa, the Rift Valley fever epidemics in East Africa. Rift Valley fever primarily affects livestock, but then spreads both by the mosquito and by direct contact to people responsible for those, for that livestock. And it carries a significant mortality rate. The cyclic cholera epidemics in India and Bangladesh all spike with El Nino events. And as you know, El Nino is becoming more frequent and lasting longer. We talked about hantaviruses and in the United States as affected by El Nino. But there's also a 50% increase in visceral leishmaniasis in Brazil, a parasitic disease with El Nino events. And then, of course, dengue in Asia, except dengue is also spreading in the Caribbean and the Gulf Coast states of the United States. So at this point, I'm going to shift to our final topic.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were switching to another thing. All right, go ahead. Keep going. You're good.
Oh, thank you.
I'm
With Philip's approval, we'll proceed to how can we adapt to rising ambient temperature in the United States and in Nevada? Just to briefly review the urban heat island effect, where rising temperatures are have their greatest impact. Notice that the peak is in the heart of the city, where there are hard radiant surfaces and less at the edges where there is more vegetation. So tree canopy is our major defense in our cities against the urban heat island effect. They shade the ground, which means less heat reaches the ground. They store less heat, so they're less of a heat sink. They're not a source of heat. And their transpiration cools the air, cools not only the people under them, but also the surrounding buildings, which also reduces the cost of air conditioning. Sandy's already told you about racial disparities in heat-related impacts on health. And this shows that Black people are way ahead of other racial groups in terms of heat-related mortality. And that's especially true, of course, in our cities. And we can see that there are reasons for that. They're much more likely in their communities to have no tree canopy at all. They also have fewer impervious surfaces which radiate more heat and keep the ambient temperature several degrees higher than in affluent areas of the same city. So what are the construction materials that are cooling for cities? So a cool roof is one that's been designed to reflect more sunlight and absorb less heat than a standard roof. Cool roofs can be made of highly reflective type of paint, a sheet covering, or highly reflective tiles or shingles. In other words, higher what's called albedo, which has nothing at all to do with sex. Albedo is the capacity of a surface to reflect incident light and therefore to be more healing. Each surface can be rated from 0 to 1 in terms of the amount of albedo. And you might actually be subconsciously aware that from ancient times, Mediterranean cities were built with white buildings, right? White buildings. This is part of the charm of Santorini, right? Green roofs, so roofs that are planted with vegetation. Cool pavements pavements are those that are both reflective and more permeable, so that rainwater can pass through into the ground below, which also helps with stormwater management. Cool cars actually offer the same advantages. That is, lighter colored cars are easier to cool. They also contribute far less to the urban heat island effect. So Enrico Fermi once said, after hearing a lecture in nuclear physics, that before I came, I was confused about this subject, and having listened to your lecture, I'm still confused, but on a higher level. So I hope I've brought you to a higher level. Thank you.
All right.
All right,
Wanna open
Sandy,
for
thank you very much. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Do we have any questions, Emily?
There's some in the chat, there's 3 chats.
Yeah.
It's not a touch screen.
It's not a touch screen. Okay.
Tell Emily to unmute whoever's got a
So
question.
Emily, do you have a question in the chat? Actually, you can switch
Chat on
to
the chat, there you go.
you can switch to the speakers.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, here we go.
I'm sorry I have to leave.
Hello, do solar roofs have albedo?
Well, that's a problem, isn't it? Yeah, most solar roofs are dark. You know, the least you can do is make the surrounding roof materials lighter colored. Yeah, I think that should be a technologic goal
They do
to.
shade the house though. Cause there's aerospace between the
Yeah.
solar panel and the house, so they do
Yeah.
shade it. We found it, it's lowered our temperature by a few degrees.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, yeah. But yeah, it would be a good thing if we could design solar panels that are not black. So,
Yeah, you gotta think, I don't know how much these solar panels, actually put off, but they are absorbing the sun. I mean, that's the way they work, so. Um, I'm not an expert on that, but for sure, the solar panels really reduced the heat in the part of the house that they are over. You know, I don't know if it's the airspace or the fact that they're actually taking the light in and turning it into energy. Certainly the lighter colors are something, and you know, as Nevada gets warmer, hopefully the building designs will keep up with that, and people will not put black shingles on their asphalt shingles on the roof. They'll put something lighter.
Yeah.
I see a question here from Robin Palmer. She's wondering if there's any data on dosage, increase or decrease of a medication required for clinical effect as relates to increasing environmental temperatures. Is there increased risk of overdose at lower amounts of street drugs?
Well, dosing certainly does. I mean, these are drugs that interfere with the body's adaptation to heat, and so obviously lower doses have a lower effect. So that's true. In terms of overdoses, well, you're less likely to overdose at a lower dose. What can I say?
Yeah, she's wondering if the heat impacts it, and I don't know the answer to that question.
Oh, the
It-
likelihood of an overdose effect. Yeah, I don't know. I'd worry about it though.
I would too. You wonder if dehydration or any of those things play a role.
Sure.
That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, we're physiologically less resilient at higher temperatures,
Yeah.
particularly temperatures above those that we're adapted to. And of course, that's the difficulty with establishing regulations, is that people and regions are adapted to different temperatures.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. It's like 70% of people who who work in heat areas, 70% of the deaths occur the first week that person works. And you mentioned that before because of adaptation.
Right.
But I'd really like to see Nevada's OSHA equivalent require training on heat-related illness for everyone, supervisors, from the top down,
Mhm.
anyone who's new. I'd like them to all require that if they're gonna be exposed to 85 degrees or higher. That's a one-off, and they can do it one a year. You can have a video. It's not that difficult. And they should have a list of those higher risk medications so that they can identify which of their employees is using something and the employees themselves know. Because I think education goes a long way here. You know, if people are aware that when they start to feel confused or fatigued, they're not supposed to push through when the temperature's high, they need to take care of themselves. You know, that these are not very costly efforts.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Supervisors and coaches,
Supervisors and coaches, exactly, coaches too.
but also the
Don't be
players,
lazy,
the
keep
players and
going.
the workers.
Yeah, the players and the workers and I gotta put a plug in for those induction stoves because those kitchens would be a heck of a lot cooler if they weren't cooking on gas.
Much better for your breathing.
There's a good point.
Yep,
We switched to induction because I have asthma.
yes, it clearly
Because of
increases.
what comes out of the gas stoves, yeah.
I don't remember exactly what percent, but a significant percentage of childhood asthma is directly related to gas, burning gas inside the home. It's a measured effects is around 15%, but I can't remember exactly what the number is, but it's very impactful. And especially with asthma, there's an increased incidence of asthma. You know this because that's why you switched over. And I love my induction stuff.
Yeah.
It's fabulous. So, the question is, how do we get all those chefs and all those restaurants to switch over because it would have an enormous impact. So thank you all.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Thank you very much, Sandy, for joining us. And we will be having another Sunday forum in 2 weeks. I've forgotten what it is, but I want to promise you it will be absolutely riveting.
That's awesome. All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice to have the people in the room. It would be really scary.
Yeah.
To
no one.
Thank you all for throwing up.
Sure. One of my colleagues at Cooperative Extension died of hantavirus. I don't know if you remember
Oh,
that, Les
wow.
Bristol. Must have been in early 90s. He had a couple of toddlers. He was sweeping, cleaning up out of the university farm. And
Oh, wow.
within 2 days, he was gone.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sweeping up. Because there's feces, there's urine where there's feces, right? Right.
Wow.